In the 1980s, the City of London had experienced explosive growth. The square mile, revolutionised by Big Bang, was about to trigger a speculative fever which took hold of the whole country.
Working for you now.
Spreading from shares to houses, art, even cars.
It was what I put in my pocket is going to be bigger than yours, and let me prove it to you. And out would come a pile of cash. Beat it. And that was very much the culture. What I can do, what I can show you, the way I work is better than you. What I can eat, what I can drink is more than you.
Now we look inside the workings of the city as the 80s bubble took hold of Britain.
There was only one rule, and that was that you should trade money. If you traded enough money, nothing else mattered. You could do whatever you wanted. You could do drugs off the desk. You could walk in, frankly, whatever time you wanted, and walk out whatever time you wanted. The only thing that mattered was that you had money on the markets. If you traded money on the markets, you were king.
Hey, Gary! Texas fire!
What happened in the City of London and in Britain in the 1980s was not an isolated event. At different times, in different countries over the centuries, a speculative madness has taken hold of the population. In 17th century Holland, for a brief moment, a tulip bulb became more precious than a house before losing its value overnight. In 1920s America, as they saw share prices soaring, millions gambled away their livelihoods on Wall Street.
They see prices going up. That justifies their confidence in affirmative prediction. They invest more. That puts more pressure on the prices. And that is the nature of the classical nature of the bubble.
In 1980s Britain, it was the stock market that started the fever.
During the 1980s, you had a series of years when the returns on stock markets were 20%, which was an extraordinary percentage rise. And that meant a whole generation of investors, or people involved in investing, who thought that investment was a very easy game. You bought something, it went up, and you made money.
It was so bloody easy to make money. There were shares out there. I didn't even know what they did. I used to buy shares on behalf of clients. And I remember one client saying to me, so what exactly is this share? He was asking me what the name of the share was and what they did, and I didn't know. So I bullshitted. And he sort of asked one of his colleagues, said, no, they're not into climbing gear, they're called Pentland. And I didn't know they're Reebok shoes. And the next minute, I sort of said, well, look, if you want to know what they bloody well are, if you want to get technical, I'll go and get an analyst. Otherwise, just buy the shares. They're going to go up in value. I don't know why everyone's buying them. I mean, it's as simple as that.
It's only when shares are first sold that money goes into the pocket of the company, or with privatisation, the government. After that, shareholders sell to each other, and the price is just a question of what the punters are willing to pay. And in the 1980s, Britain was being turned into a nation of punters. When Azil Nadir joined Polly Peck, shares in the fruit packaging company rose by 2,708% in 1 year. In 1985, when Laura Ashley came to the market, queues over 100 yards long formed. Shares went up by more than half in the first day's dealing. It seemed an easy killing. In the sock shop flotation, the public tried to subscribe to 53 times as many shares as were offered. Tyrac did even better, the public sending in more than £1 billion for the 12.5 million shares on offer. Yet in a few years, all these companies would face disaster. And just like any bubble, horizons expanded, this time first to foreign shares. With modern communications and deregulation, speculators could put their money anywhere. They joined the global market with glee. They invested in the bull market in Wall Street, and they took advantage of the phenomenal growth in share values in Tokyo.
It was easy. I traded the Japanese Seat market.
You come in the morning, there've been huge volume traded on the Nikkei in Tokyo, and you just picked your stocks. And you could jump in and out of them during the day. This was the point. Because there was so much volume and so many people were interested and there was so much confidence, that you had nothing really to worry about.
It was time for a wider public to be sucked into the speculative share bubble. The Conservative government was keen to privatise publicly owned industries. The sale of state assets from British Airways to BT, BP and British Gas not only created a nation of speculators, it also fueled the huge growth in city money and profits, adding to the spiral.
The privatisation programme was a colossal boon for the city. It involved, firstly, very exciting, interesting ideas, which a lot of merchant bankers, I think, found intellectually very fascinating to work on. And it led to very, very large transactions, which everyone was keen to get in on.
Even before Big Bang, privatisation was a bonanza for the city. For the stockbrokers, turnover trebled as millions of new investors bought and sold shares. For the merchant banks, £1 billion was to come from the government.
Well, in city terms, it was akin to the discovery of a new gold mine, because a whole new line of business developed because of this. And in the 80s, you'll have to remember that as a result of this program, the British merchant banks suddenly became in the forefront of something which was of huge international interest. Now, it's been rare in the last 20 or 30 years, where Britain was so much in the forefront of a development such as this. People would come to our doors, and the number of delegations, visitors that would come into the city to ask about this was profound. The invisible earnings which the city must have earned from privatisation over the years must be enormous. I mean, a very, very big line of business.
The city and the Conservative Party were at one, and they seemed to work hand in glove, advancing each other's interest, even swapping jobs.
There was also a kind of natural meeting of minds, in a way, between city grandees and kind of Conservative ministers who were dealing with privatisation, Lord Walker.
Have you got Sid's application yet?
Haven't come across it yet.
Norman Lamont, all those kind of people, a lot of people who had either city or financial backgrounds and who themselves rather liked to get involved in the shaping the structure of these transactions.
They look like 81.
Norman Lamont had worked at Rothschild's, the venerable city merchant bank.
Share price.
Lord Wakeham, who privatised electricity, became a director of the bank after he'd left the cabinet. And John Redwood headed Rothschild's privatisation unit before joining Mrs. Thatcher at number 10.
Rothschild was heavy with people who did have links with the Conservative Party, but I'm not particularly persuaded that that was an enormous factor in bringing the work in. I think it was a second-order effect in that these people had been thinking about privatisation and related issues for some years before, and that was something that perhaps had not been going on in every other bank in town.
Rothschilds rose to the top of the league, taking part in 18 out of the government's 33 privatisations. But the other city merchant banks competed strongly for the rich pickings which came from selling the government's shares to the public. They did everything they could to win the business from the politicians.
There was immense store was set by who was personally friendly with which minister, who shopped with Mr. Heseltine, or I remember in our case, somebody's sister-in-law was a typist in 10 Downing Street and was somehow persuaded to slip a copy of one of our privatisation proposals related to British Telecom into the Prime Minister's red box for the weekend, and we were all immensely proud of that. That was actually as close as we ever got to getting work on the British Telecom privatisation. But that was the nature of the process of trying to get the work.
Privatisation was only a part of the revolution which was fueling the city boom.
One of the things about the whole privatisation programme is that it was not something that happened in isolation. All the other issues that were happening in the city, the deregulation, Big Bang, the demise of the trading floor in the stock exchange, were happening at the same time, and these things are all overlaid and interwoven. A revolution in the way the city conducted its own business was underway.
It wasn't only trading in shares which shot up and made the city money. In the world of electronic dealing rooms after Big Bang, the city's banks had become financial supermarkets. Turnover doubled in the currency market alone in just 3 years. Whole new markets sprang up as the bank's dealers gambled against each other on the future direction of currencies, interest rates and shares.
The late 80s was a time when you had very, very big deals going through the market, huge sums of money being made. Business was very, very big, very, very brutal, very, very aggressive. And people liked to be associated with this aggressive business.
In the huge electronic trading rooms, a dealer bets against someone else on another screen in another bank who takes the opposite view. They advertise the price at which they want to buy or sell on the screen until someone replies willing to do the deal. It can take just a split second, but in this vast electronic marketplace, if there are more buyers or sellers, prices can move rapidly and create massive profits. In the 1980s, rewards for the successful could be huge.
Most traders were paid a very nominal salary, sometimes less than $100,000, and were paid most of their money in a bonus. A common salary for a trader would be $100,000, and a common bonus would be $400,000 or $500,000. Everything was based on one's performance in the past year. That was not new. What was new was the size of the pay packages. That the rewards just went through the roof. That people made so much more money doing this than they did before. The numbers were so much bigger. And there was a whole culture of bonuses.
The bonus was life itself, because not only was it a percentage of your salary, it was usually treble your salary. So you'd live off your salary, and the bonus was not just the cream, it was the cream, the candles, the house that surrounded it, and everything else.
By 1987, the average income in Britain was just £10,000 a year. At the same time, hundreds of young city traders were receiving bonuses of £100,000 and more.
Bonus time was like nothing else I'd ever seen. The mood on the floor changed completely. People would talk about nothing else. Did you hear? Didn't you hear? When is your meeting? What did you do? How did it go? I mean, it was just extraordinary.
The annual ritual of handouts took place at the beginning of every year.
There was incredible controversy at bonus time with people being called into the big boss's room. Very often as well, the great big boss would have a list in front of him with names and bonuses, and if he didn't cover that up, and if the person opposite him could read writing upside down, which a lot of people could, the whole game would be out, and you'd have to smile, no matter what size your bonus was, because everybody would be scrutinizing your face. But, you know, a few people couldn't quite keep up that image, and then there'd be whispered conferences, and then incredible jealousy and acrimony, and a lot of people leaving.
As you approach the time when it comes time to pay people, it is harder for them to focus on the business they're supposed to be doing, and they all begin to kind of wonder what they're going to get paid. And it becomes almost extraordinary. You can try as hard as a manager to get them paid, and whatever you get them paid is probably never seems like enough.
As the market grew, bonuses continued to rise.
One guy came into my office, and I was going to give him an enormous bonus, what I thought was an enormous bonus. And we're talking about £500,000, maybe more, maybe much more. And I thought he was going to be thrilled. He reacted as if I had given him an insult. And he said, "This is a humiliation. I can't accept this." And I thought to myself, this is unbelievable. This is more money than I thought I would make in a lifetime. And this guy is behaving like a 3-year-old whose candy I've taken away.
I've never experienced a situation of tremendous elation, though. Why? Because most people in this business are pretty good poker players. And if one all of a sudden wins a hand of poker and takes off the table more than you thought you were going to take, you generally won't, you won't crack a smile. It's a pretty hard crowd.
The dealers' poker-playing skills were learned on the floor as they gambled against their opposite number. It was a game of bluff and double bluff, and if found out, they could lose millions. But if they were right more often than wrong, they could make their banks a fortune.
If you're sitting there and you're exposed to millions of dollars worth of risk, and that's meaning that you could either lose or make, especially make $1 million in one trade or something, or 2 trades, then paying someone $200,000 is peanuts.
The urgency of the business, the large number of trades compressed into ever shorter periods of time, changed the city's outlook. In such a dangerous game where no mercy was shown to the losers, a trader's outlook narrowed.
Your time frame, your horizon was not a career or even a few years, it was a year. Everybody was gunning for the biggest bonus at the end of the year. So there was this grasping for short-term returns because you knew that you were paid immediately. So that if a deal was big enough and it meant doing damage to the customer, he was much more likely to do it because it was worth it.
There is an element of greed in most people. If you're a 28-year-old trader, you can make as much money as the highest paid industrialist in the land just for sitting at a screen trading this stuff. That, I think, warped people's minds somewhat.
As a result of the high bonuses, a group of young people in the city became extremely and often conspicuously rich.
People did develop this idea that in some way they were masters of the universe, that they could tread over anything, and if they couldn't tread over it, they could buy it.
As profits and bonuses took off, in this wealthy world, corporate entertainment too became ever more extravagant.
Classically, on a Monday morning, there'd be a huge competition, especially on the trading floor, where everyone said, "So, what did you do this weekend?" Someone said, "Well, I stayed at the Hermitage in Monte Carlo," or, stayed somewhere and stayed at the Crillon in Paris. And what did you do? "Oh, I flew Concorde to New York." There was one particularly ostentatious display of wealth where a group of senior executives from an American bank hired about 8 helicopters, in fact, the entire helicopter fleet, and went out with clients and went heli-skiing and got terribly excited and kept quoting scenes from Apocalypse Now, like, "We're going to take this mountain." And it was just a freebie.
In our market, we live with our clients, and at weekends, we thought nothing of flying to Portugal, sangria all the way, and then flying back, and the following weekend we go skiing. And there was a lot of money, but one has to remember, the weekend was probably costing, for 3 people, £10,000, which was, it's unheard of now, it's silly money. But that client's business, he would do that in a minute's worth of business.
I remember a desk manager saying to me, he took me and a friend of mine to his booth one day and said, "Now listen, boys, I've heard a lot of people say that your performance is slacking at the moment because you're out partying too much and hitting it too hard. But frankly, I think that's rubbish. I think you need to be hitting it much harder." The use of cocaine was absolutely rife. I remember a regulation coming in one day that we shouldn't do cocaine from the desks anymore. We should at least be sort of slightly more discreet and go to the loos. We would just arrange for couriers to go out and bite coke into the office. The couriers would have no idea what they were sending as far as they were concerned. They were exchanging contracts.
if you're used to a certain lifestyle with a certain amount of money and you set your benchmarks and you operate around that, if you suddenly have a lot more money and you're trying to find a way to define that, it's hard. Suddenly you're going out at night, you have a nicer car, people find you more attractive, whatever it may be, it isn't easy to deal with it. It just isn't easy.
I mean, you had chaps who they're running stressed. I mean, they'd lost an awful lot of money, and they'd seen their whole bonus, their salary, everything flash before their eyes most mornings. So I think some of them used to like take a bit of coke to keep them on the sort of straight and narrow.
People often have the misconception that it's the stress of the city that leads people in the city to using, drink and drugs excessively. But it's complete rubbish. People in the city were already addicted. That's why they chose to go into the city. It attracts those addictive types. It's that buzz, it's that whole thrill. It's very attractive to somebody who's addicted.
You could see it in their faces, this sort of look of extraordinary arrogance and contempt for others, or a lack of compassion, a lack of charity, and a seeming loss of morality. The trouble is, though, is that you're on the roller coaster. You're strapped in, and getting off is difficult. Getting off when you're earning a lot of money, getting off when you're enjoying the fruits, when they're so succulent, is tough. Very, very tough.
The huge salaries and bonuses which made life so sweet for the men and women of the city had an effect on the economy of the country, especially the southeast. By the late 80s, 2,000 top city earners together were receiving more than £1 billion in salary and bonuses. Their newfound wealth stoked Britain's speculative boom.
Bonuses, without doubt, had a great impact. In fact, they still do today. When the city does well, then London property prices do well. And there were some phenomenal bonuses paid at that time because there was some phenomenal performance.
As Adam Smith wrote, with the greater part of rich people, the chief enjoyment consists in the parade of riches. By 1986, top city earners were spending half their annual income on property in London and the surrounding countryside.
Big Bang blew the whistle for the capital that these people had suddenly accumulated overnight to go and squander out in the country. And they bought anything that they liked, that they saw. And country houses was a big statement to their friends that they had made it. Some of them have a recce of the kind of houses they would like, and then tell us that they will be in touch when the city bonuses come out in March. And the kind of bonuses that they are expecting are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds.
These people were having their salaries increased quite dramatically. They went off and bought their large estates in Hampshire and Wiltshire and Dorset. And that led to one of the biggest transfers of land since the Reformation.
By the end of 1986, the year of Big Bang, the price of country houses on the outskirts of London and in the home counties had risen by 30%. As the top end of the market rose, it pulled up the rest.
The city was incredibly important to the property boom, and historically, when property prices have started rising in London, then they've rippled out to the other regions in the UK.
In the 80s property boom, the newly rich city financiers and dealers drove prices higher and higher by their own speculation.
I think that bearing in mind the amount of money that's being made in the city, the chances are we're going to send to a city-based gentleman. As far as the price guide is concerned, I would suggest that we should pitch it at, we should ask offers in the region of £500,000. Having said that, I wouldn't rule out the chances of selling it for more than that. The person most likely to buy a house like this will undoubtedly be somebody from the city who's made an immense amount of money over the last year or so, and this is the type of house which he would like to have in the country. The chances are that he will spend an enormous amount of money on it, having bought it. There's one down the road here that's probably had about £1 million spent on it over the last 2 or 3 years, and that having done it up, he will probably not spend a great deal of time here.
What provided the adrenaline for me is that I almost became a tutor to these city types, because they saw me in my country outfit and said, now that I own all this land, what should I do with it? And I said, well, the first thing is that you should perhaps hunt, and because then in that way you can really enjoy getting out into the country. I recall the bankers stood out from the rest of my guests because everything that they were wearing was brand new. Bought, not hired, for the day. So brand new barbers, brand new wellies, not quite a new dog, but wanting to know actually what goes on. Most of them didn't know the backside of a horse from the front side of a horse.
A new bidder, 40,000, 42,000.
The new rich of the city also became patrons of the London sale rooms, both to speculate and as part of the parade of riches.
At 65,000, you bid at the back of the room at 65, all down, 65,000.
The link in the city, and the link between the city and the London auction rooms, is that there were a lot of young people, i.e. between 25 and 45 years old, who suddenly found themselves in a lucky position in having bonuses paid to them. So as well as having a fast car to drive and a smart apartment, perhaps overlooking the Thames, they also wanted to furnish that apartment. And they wanted to furnish it with bright, colourful pictures. And so they came to the auction rooms.
880.
Speculation moved on to cars. New city money was attracted to anything that was collectible and which might rise in value. Money went in, prices went up too.
I got a call one morning from, he didn't identify himself as somebody in the city, but I could hear frenetic activity in the background. It was obviously from a dealing room. And he was asking me about a Ferrari and how much it was. We discussed it for a minute, and before he rang off, I said, by the way, what's happening with the pound today? And he said, hang on a minute. Yes, it's blah, 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 blah. And it did amuse me that all these city types were getting involved in the action.
£5 million. For you, sir, £5 million.
There was a lot of activity from what I would call non-car enthusiasts who were buying the cars strictly for profit or speculation. The cars were not even being driven on the road, they were being transported immediately after sale to secure locations. Were never ever seen. And there they were kept till the speculator either sold them or didn't sell them.
Okay. The attitude from the city buyers, particularly the 25 to 40-year-olds, is that in general terms they didn't really fully understand or fully appreciate what they were buying. They bought pictures because they looked upon them as another commodity, a way of making a few quick bucks in a short space of time, and then selling the picture and making quite a profit on it in perhaps 9 months, a year later.
This is Ferrari 250 GTO. It's a competition car that in the mid-80s was worth probably just under £2 million. But by 1989, at least one, probably two examples were sold for about £10 million.
There was one particular picture which we sold in June of 1990, and my feeling was that prior to the sale we knew it would make a new world record. It was by Thomas Cooper Gotch. I knew that it would probably fetch over £100,000, bearing in mind that the previous world record had only been 15,000. The actual painting that we had for sale depicting the artist's daughter amongst poppies fetched a colossal £150,000. So it went from 15 to 150 in just 3 years.
As everything moved up ever faster under the pressure of so much buying, it seemed as if the rise in prices would last forever. The banks now became keen to lend, encouraging the public at large to join in.
The banks were giving virtually forcing people to take money. So you wanted to buy a classic car, fine, take the money and go and buy it.
But most of the borrowed money went into property.
The banks did lend for speculation in the 1980s because they felt quite comfortable. Because property prices were rising on average, let's say 25% per annum, they felt that they were pretty well covered. And because there were so many of them competing for the same business, they felt that if they turned a customer away, they were just putting him straight into the hands of another bank.
During the 80s, once the financial boom had really started, anyone with access to money was speculating in buildings of all kinds, not just in the city but elsewhere. People were speculating in their own houses, in garages, warehouses, anything.
Borrowed money also went into shares on the back of the privatisation boom.
Give you 20.
Here too, the banks added fat to the fire.
Right, come on, what's the bit?
People would borrow money to buy shares. Banks were happy to advance that money to buy the shares because shares only ever went up, didn't they? And so you'd borrow money, the money would go into the shares would go up, and then on the basis of the shares which had gone up on the borrowed money, you'd borrow more money to buy more shares, and everything was zooming up. It was a collective madness.
The stock market came to be regarded as a money-making machine. In 1987, there was a stampede into equities as the market reached record highs.
It's a well-documented phenomenon, the delusions of crowds. Something that one person wouldn't believe are things that a crowd of people will believe because of the pressure of his peer group. And you do suspend disbelief. And it's very difficult to stand out against it because if everybody else is telling you things are looking fantastic and everything is going to go up, then for you to say no, and it goes up in the short term, A, makes you look pretty foolish, and B, it doesn't make you very popular.
Howard, 8:30.
The fast pace of events in the global market seemed to justify the pervading sense of optimism. Both New York and Tokyo reached record highs at the same time as London. On the trading floors, the salesmen gave only one piece of advice to their clients: buy.
Well, the general view until the day of reckoning was that this was a new era. Stocks had taken on a new value, that the economy had taken on a new strength. This was the overwhelming view until the day of reckoning. And that is always true. The financial wisdom, the financial mind is always on the side of optimism until the day of the crash.
Mrs. Thatcher has been elected, I would remind you. We must allow something for that. The fundamentals suggest that the market is going to continue to go up fairly sharply from here.
I played a full part in the literature which attempted to justify why the good times would last forever, always coming up with a different angle to support something that any reasonable person stepping onto the earth from Mars would say must end. But I fell into the same trap that everybody else did, because you want it to last forever, don't you?
The hyperactive city share dealers thought they were on course for their highest ever bonuses. By June 1987, stocks and shares had risen to new record levels, helped by Mrs. Thatcher's election to a third term in office. But despite the euphoria, the fundamental problems of the British economy remained the same. The stock market's rise turned out to be just part of the cycle of boom and bust which had plagued the economy since the war. But at the time, Nigel Lawson, the Chancellor, spoke of an economic miracle.
People who were still buying shares would say, this time it's all different because this time we have very strong growth in the UK with prolonged low inflation and better management of the economy, better management of British industry, and it will go on for the indefinite future. And therefore we can always see why the stock market should be at a higher level than it is now. Now, there have been several times that's happened in my working life in various markets of the world where people have said this, let alone if you go back through history.
The financial memory is not over 10 or 15 years, and a new generation comes along persuaded that it has the answer, persuaded that it has the magic, and is indifferent to the sour experience of the generation before.
The tremendous crowds which you see gathered outside the stock exchange are due to the greatest crash in the history of the New York Stock Exchange in market prices.
There's one Japanese investment bank trader who, the week immediately before the crash, said this market is going to the moon. I'm quite confident. And he wasn't the only person who said that. Other people use different phrases. There is sex in this market type of thing. This market is looking brilliant, firm, all the rest of it. And this was leading up to Friday the 16th, the Friday immediately before Monday the 19th. So no one had a bloody clue. No one, not even the expert.
People thought we'd got a job, you know, there were desks being built every day for 10 more people. I mean, no, I don't think ever thought that it was actually going to finish.
It came as such a shock to people that there was an end. It was as if people thought the good times would last forever, and we would just have euphoria for decades. And nobody ever imagined that the roller coaster would stop and that the enormous growth that we enjoyed would cease.
But it would, and the money which had built up during the boom would evaporate. Once again, the City of London was to discover the cost of human folly. And the aftermath of the crash would bring much pain to the city, and with the recession, to the people of Britain.